God has given all of us a mission to make disciples here and everywhere for the glory of God.
Minus 10, 9.
We want our church to be a launch pad for sending people out on the mission God has for them. Regardless of who you are, we all have a role to play. We are all involved in God's story. We pray that the story shared through Mission Control will encourage you to see how God is calling you to be used by Him. Hello, my name is Amanda Levy, and I'm the Communications Director here at First Baptist Melbourne and the host of this podcast. And today we have Pastor Larry Bazer joining us. Larry was the pastor here at First Baptist Melbourne from 1986 to 2011. Would you consider that a retirement going into what you're doing now?
It was an early retirement. I took, at 63 and a half, made a decision, but kind of the 25-year mark was the impetus to go ahead and retire and go into transition to this ministry.
Yeah, so he has a ministry called Sent ETC. What does ETC stand for?
Equipping the church.
Ah, okay. Sent Equipping the Church. So I'm looking forward to unpacking this. Larry, just great guy. I think anyone, if you haven't met him yet, then I hope this will be a good conversation. If you have, I hope this will also be a good conversation. Before we get into it, though, he told me off camera he doesn't know much about space, so I'm hoping that's not really like a thick space-themed icebreaker question, but we're going to suspend any theological discussions about extraterrestrial beings and just go into fantasy here.
Okay.
But imagine you're competing in a galactic talent show against aliens from across the universe. What unique skill or talent would you showcase to represent Earth? It doesn't necessarily have to be a talent you possess.
Okay, it would be some sports theme, I think, either shooting a basketball or hitting a golf ball, neither of which I am doing much good at now, but some kind of sports that they would not have in space.
What kind of sports could you, this is going off the wall, man. It would be interesting if at this talent show, if it was all sports, I'd be curious what kind of other planet sports could be out there. It'd be interesting.
It might be. Jumping without gravity, height,
that is a talent we do not possess. Yeah, it would be interesting. Well, as much fun as it is to talk about outer space, we'd love to talk a little bit about your space. So where does God currently have you on mission in your life?
The last 13 years, Amanda, I have traveled probably anywhere from 5 to 7 trips a year internationally, and most of it has been teaching and training pastors who've not had an opportunity to go to any seminary. Though some of the trips of countries that I've been to several times have become evangelistic in their form, which I enjoy doing that as much, just going into homes and sharing the gospel and seeing people make decisions for Christ and so forth. So,
how did you get started doing that? Like, it's a big jump from just being here and now we're going to other countries.
Well, really, being a pastor through the years really led into this decision, and I shared with you ahead of time a couple of events that really did shape and mature that decision. One is, as a pastor, I was working with our association, the Brevard Association. We had a seminary extension program where lay people and even some lay pastors who had not been to seminary would come once a week, and I went through the whole Bible in different, like we had the Gospels, we had Old Testament prophets and historical books, and I did that for probably 6 or 7 years, and so I really enjoyed the teaching part of my ministry, and then the second year I was here, I went on a mission trip to Brazil for the first time, skipped a year, and then went 19 straight years to Brazil. And that led to a desire to go. I went to Haiti through the Florida Baptist Convention, and our church went 10 straight years teaching and training leaders in Port-au-Prince. And we had about 4 that went with me, and I taught pastors, someone else taught women, my wife taught children's workers, and we had a guy taught youth workers. And those combinations of going on those first mission trips, I found I really had a great love for missions and other cultural experiences. And so it kind of just sealed as I came close to the 25th anniversary and realizing anybody could pastor this great church. They didn't need me. And we had some great people in the wings to lead, including Scott and all. That, the Lord just really impressed on me that this would be something I would love to do, combining missions and teaching and training. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of how.
You shared a cool story off camera about that first mission trip. So what was it that kind of gave you?
We had a lay person in our church, former pastor's wife, who came back from a state WMU convention where the pastor had challenged the women to send their pastor on an international mission trip. I'd never been on one. Uh-huh. So she came back to me and said, well, I inherited some money and I've got $5,000. Is that enough to send you on a trip? I said, yeah, around the world, back then. And anyway, 2 other staff members and 3 other laymen from our church went on that first trip to Rio de Janeiro. The next year, I didn't go, and then the group I was going with just continued to go every year. And so I went for 19 straight years. And so that really was the beginning. And I've shared that story as far as a layperson giving the money to send was what God stirred my heart to be involved in missions. Mm-hmm.
Did the church have a connection with Rio at that time? What was?
No, I had a connection with the guy who led the tour, and there was almost 100 people that went on this trip, and we divided among churches in Rio, and Martha Root was part of that, and 2 former staff members were as well, and Martha has continued to go almost every year, to Brazil as well, but no, there was. I knew the leader of that group from Louisiana. Mm-hmm. And he and another pastor led these ongoing groups. Some of them, there were medical teams, there were building teams, mm-hmm. and then we divided in churches and did revivals and witnessing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. So let's rewind a little bit here. Go back to your childhood.
Okay. I was raised in a Christian home. In fact, my dad was my pastor till I was in the 4th grade.
Oh, I did not realize you were a pastor's kid.
Yeah.
Okay.
But he got out of the ministry and really determined. His dad and 2 older brothers were pastors.
So you have a long line of pastors. Yeah. Okay.
But he was not really, he never did like to preach, never did like worked on sermons, but he was great with people. But anyway, he changed careers. And
How old were you when he changed careers?
Let's see, 4th grade, I would have been 10.
Fairly young. Okay.
Yeah, real young. But when I was 11, the church we were going to, I sensed the call that God was calling me into full-time Christian ministry, and preached my first sermon when I was 15. Wow. And by my senior year, between my senior year and college, I was supply preaching every Sunday in the Shreveport area. Mm-hmm. And then when I went to college, it gave me heads up on some of the other ministerial students to be able to preach youth revivals and all, because I'd had some experience anyway. But so I was preaching early, and then when I went to seminary at Southwestern in Fort Worth, at the end of the first semester, I went out to a church lead singing one Sunday. Okay. And the pastor was gone in view of a call somewhere else. And so the church knew I was a ministerial student. They invited me to preach. And within a month, they called me as a pastor.
Oh, okay.
So I was about 25 miles northwest of the seminary. And so all the time I was in seminary, I pastored. And then I came back to Louisiana. And I was in Louisiana 13 years when I was called here as pastor.
Okay. How does one gain their first preaching opportunity at 15? What was your church?
Oh, that's an interesting story because we had moved to Shreveport from South Louisiana, and my grandfather lived there. Okay. And
was your grandfather still a pastor at this time?
He was doing the interim work, and he was supply preaching. Well, I was cutting his grass, and he called me in one day and said, "There's a pastor here that's asked me to preach Sunday, and I already have an invite. I told him about you, and he's willing to take a chance on you, so go talk to him." So I did.
Had you ever preached a sermon before this?
I think I had in my own church on like a Wednesday night.
Okay.
But anyway, the pastor invited me to come up there to Rodessa, which was an oil boom town north of Shreveport. And then every time my granddad had a second invitation, he'd tell them about me. And then, like I said, by the end of my senior year, I had gone to enough churches that I supplied all during that summer, every Sunday. Mm-hmm. And, it was a great experience for me.
That's awesome. Even, can you imagine nowadays a 15-year-old getting up there and giving a sermon?
Maybe a small church like ours.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. All right, so let's go now to First Baptist Melbourne. You're at First Baptist Melbourne. Would you be willing to share the story of kind of how God started stirring in your heart to take this step?
Okay, well, the combinations I've already said about the teaching pastors and our teaching lay people who really want to go deeper in the Word of God in the association. And then my ministry has been, much like Scott, a teaching ministry more than just, quote, a preaching ministry. Mm-hmm. And then the combination of missions. I was in Panama on a mission trip, and I told some of the guys that I really felt God was saying retire and take this step and be open and available to whatever and wherever he wanted me to go. Mm-hmm. And so I came back and told the staff. They were a little bit shocked. They weren't really ready, thinking that I would go until I was 65. Yeah. But in my mind, I didn't want the church to do a big thing on my 25th and then come back a year and a half later and do something else big. And so it's interesting, Amanda, that right about that time, I had gone down in an exchange preaching at Bay West.
Yeah, so I was hoping we'd get to this story. Go on.
Okay, and so while I was down there, I came back early because they finished early, and I heard Scott was preaching that Sunday for me. And he was preaching on John Piper's theme, Don't Waste Your Life. Mm-hmm. And I almost went forward during the invitation and would have shocked Scott, and just saying, I really felt God was saying, not that I was wasting my life here,
sure.
But
he was calling you to something else.
Yes. And but it wasn't long after that the Panama trip happened, and I really it sealed.
So the Panama trip was after that sermon.
After that. Okay. And it really sealed in my mind that this is the step I needed to take. So.
Okay. So how have you found the partnerships and the relationships you've had with all of these different destinations?
It's been fantastic. I was just sharing with somebody yesterday. I can't remember what was the occasion, but it was in my Sunday school class. I was teaching that like Paul went back to the churches that he had been on his first missionary journey. I said, it's been a real joy that I have built relationships just like I have here in this church. Mm-hmm. The value of being in a long-term pastorate, the value of going back to a same country over and over again, Brazil, India, and Romania. I've been to Romania and India over 15 times, Brazil 25 to 30 times. Mm-hmm. And there was the first few years that I was doing this, I went to China for about 7 or 8 years and went to several cities there, working through New Orleans Seminary in training pastors. So you build up relationships with the translators and also with the host pastors in these different countries, and I've really had some unique experiences there in these. Like I came back from Brazil, 3 weeks in Brazil in November, and I worked with 5 different churches in that 3 weeks, and we had over 300 professions of faith, mostly students in high schools. And that's another unique thing. In many countries, you can go into schools where you can't hear, and but the relationship with those 3 or 4 churches that I have spent weeks with them at different times, and the pastors there, their families. I've watched children grow up to get married, and in Brazil, some of the teenagers who were like 12 and 13 when we first went there have now children that are more than that, older than that. So it's been fascinating to have that kind of relationship with them.
Yeah. How have you seen God working through this ministry?
Well, I've tried to figure out how many different students that have gone through classes, and I cannot tell you. It's been over 1,000, I know, through the years. And to know that they are multiplying through the discipleship that was done with them, that they were trained not only through my course, but there were other ministers that were going too in a couple of these situations that have started churches and multiplied their ministry. And I've worked with Bruce Snavely in our church.
Yes.
And I don't know if you've interviewed him
I
yet.
have. It was a great interview. Good little plug.
He is doing a fantastic job in ministry in Africa.
Yeah.
And so I started going with him about 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay.
And I've worked myself out of a job there because he and I and others have trained the nationals.
Other people to train, yeah.
And so now they're going, and they've gone into 24 of the 54 countries in Africa,
That's
I think it
awesome.
is. And you know, it's just exciting to see the multiplication that they're doing it like, you know, God told us to do. You know, we train a disciple who then disciples somebody else who disciples somebody else. And he is doing that more effectively in Africa than anybody I've seen. So I get a plug for Bruce, my good friend. Okay.
Nice. Good plug.
Yeah.
Kind of going back, was it scary at all to take that step out of so long of your teaching ministry in a church context?
Well, I won't use the word scary. It was a step of faith, and yet I really believed I would do it as long as God gave me health and God provided the funds. And it's been interesting that the funds have all come from people in our church, okay? But it's only been a handful of people, and that I know of. There are people who give directly to my ministry, and there's some who give now through the church.
Gotcha.
But the majority per month has come through individuals, and the funds are there to make, like I said, anywhere from 5 to 7 trips a year. And the church included in their budget a portion for pastor emeritus or sent, okay? And they do $500 a month. They figured that a trip would take around $3,000, and so that's what that is a year. And that's, for most trips, I can do it on $3,000. But we pay all of our expenses, you know, hotel, food, the travel, and so, yeah.
But so it was a natural step for you then?
I feel it was.
That's
awesome. I wasn't anxious about
That's
it or
great.
not afraid. The worst part has been traveling because I'm not an organized person, and sometimes I've made some mistakes on my scheduling
I've
planes.
heard some stories, yes.
But and then of course I lost my luggage for 10 days last.
That was
trip.
going to India, right?
India, yeah, last year. On the way to the airport, my son-in-law took me to the airport, and he said, "Have you ever had any lost luggage?" I said, "Man, I've never had any lost luggage. It's all the trips I've made." And then that trip was
What
the
are
trip.
the odds?
Yeah.
Was your family supportive of the change?
Very much, very much. And you know, and Gail has been able to go with me several places. We went to Panama together. We went to Nicaragua together. Brazil many times, and. When she can go, she wants to go, and I think that spurred her love for missions too. And she went on several trips without me, you know, different places. So
yeah. Looking back, where have you seen obvious places of God's direction in this journey?
The China experience. I was at a Southern Baptist convention. I think the year that I retired, and just walking in the exhibit booth area, I saw a group called Advance 2. And stopped and talked to them, and they were sending groups to China, and that really interested me, fascinated me, and I told them my experience and what I was fixing to do, and so they signed me up, and I went, like I said, to probably 10 to 15 different cities in China. Great experience, and God used that, and then what was the question again?
Where have you seen obvious?
Okay. Brazil,
steps of God's direction.
Obviously, because we were using the wordless book, Amanda, in our witness in homes. And we've gone back, say, 10, 15 years after that first trip, and we meet people who said, "Oh, yeah, I remember the wordless book. I remember the gospel you shared," and people who were saved. And I know one experience just right across the street from the main church we went to, a man who was a policeman, and his family were members of the church, but he was not a Christian. and just sharing with him, and he kept having questions, and I kept saying, the Bible says, the Bible says, Bible says. And, this last time I went, he is a very active, faithful member of that church, and his whole family is. And it's just exciting to see how God worked in that family's life.
Yeah.
And that's been multiplied with other families as well.
Yeah.
But Brazil is where I've had the greatest evangelistic. The last 2 years, we saw over 300 people pray to receive Christ. And I'm not so naive to think these are disciples. They're converts. But unless someone gets in with these young people and really spends some time discipling them, I don't know what impact and what eternal impact will be on their lives, but I know they heard the gospel and they responded.
Yeah. Yeah. How have things been with your teaching ministry in some of these more secure locations?
Okay.
How have you seen God work through that?
Okay, this year I was determined that I would spend some time on discipleship, and I wrote a book on discipleship, the first book I wrote, Yes, You Can Make Disciples, and I actually said, okay, as I went to these three main churches, can we set up a Saturday or Sunday afternoon discipleship seminar? And we did, and I feel positive that they're going to put into practice some of these principles to help work with the new converts. Mm-hmm. And so in future trips I make to Brazil or to Romania, I'm wanting to not just preach. I want to have something to leave with them to help strengthen them in their discipleship. Another exciting in Romania, I've worked with many Romanian churches, but I really gravitated toward working with gypsy churches in the last, I think it's been about 10 years. We helped buy property and build. In fact, our church finished out a basement that became a church. Then that church split, and the group I'm working with now, we helped buy property, some of my supporters, and I challenge, and then build a building that will hold over 300 people. Well. And they've had me out every year. I go back to see them. Well, this last summer, our church sent a group, and we had a gypsy youth camp. First time the youth have had a camp just for them. Mm-hmm. And we had 75 to 85 youth. And on the first day, and the theme was following Jesus, discipleship. First day, I taught a morning course. I presented the gospel with the wordless book, and about 3/4 of them prayed to receive Christ. And then we had all week to teach and train them in discipleship. Yeah. So that was, and we're planning on going back this next year. We've already signed up a week in the church, and we'll be a combination working there at the Gypsy Camp, and then at Nelu, Artilon's, the church, one of the main churches in Bistrica, doing like a Bible school. So if anybody's listening to this is a great
Romania,
opportunity.
Right?
In Romania. Super.
Summer 2025?
Yes, in July. July. And this ministry was started by Tom and Arlene Beal, who were in our church, and have been going to Romania since '91. Okay. But they're in their 80s now, and they pulled back. And Mitch and Tanya now are leading that ministry. Oh, okay. The There's Hope Foundation. Okay. And so they'll be heading up that ministry. It'll be about a 10-day trip. In July, and hopefully we'll have many people sign up for that.
Yeah. How many people would a trip like that be on a team?
Well, last year, just for the camp, we took 7, and we could have used more. We really wanted to do the camp and the Bible school, but we didn't have enough people. Gotcha. So probably 20 people would be great. Yeah.
Cool. Well, if you're listening, Romania, July, you said?
July
2025. You can find information on our website, more than likely.
Yeah.
But
I think the dates are already down. Our problem last year, we didn't secure the camp till August the 1st. And so we went to try to find people here. We couldn't find anybody in the youth-led department because school started that week. Oh, and it was a bad timing. So we moved it up earlier, so hoping we get some of our youth leaders to go. Yeah. Recreation leaders and all. So
that'd be cool. What excites you in the next year or so of ministry opportunities? What are some trips you have coming up?
Yeah, I've had an interest in going to Cuba if I can go teaching and training pastors. And I have been talking with Ted Badger. And we're trying to work out some possibilities there. And I've always said I'd like to add one new country a year, but at the same time, I've felt led to back off a little bit and concentrate on maybe 4 main trips a year.
Okay.
And in addition, we go to Israel every other year, and this year we're going have a group of 40. We have 42 signed up to go to Greece and Turkey to see in the steps of Paul and John, which is almost a mission trip, but it's a great experience to walk in the steps of those the apostles. And so I'm looking forward to that. So that would be 5 major trips a year if I do that. And again, the body is not as young as it used to be.
It's just not getting more spry and young.
No.
Has God been faithful to provide the energy on these trips?
He has. I definitely have slowed down, and I had some health issues this last year, and but God has seen me through them. And
that's awesome. Yeah. So you have 5 trips coming up this year. Is that what you said?
Well, if you count the Greece,
which I'm going to count. That's a trip.
Yeah, right.
That takes a toll.
And there may be a possibility of going back to Tanzania, working in a church, like doing a conference for a week-long evangelistic or teaching ministry.
And you're teaching a Sunday school group right now, is that correct?
I am associate teacher. I was the main teacher.
How long have you been doing teaching or associate teaching of the class?
Almost since I retired. Tony Kessinger's class, Truth Seeker, when he retired, I took over, and then Paul Medley became my associate. But I was out so much, Paul became the teacher, and I became the associate.
I heard your voice going through the hallways this Sunday.
Yeah, I've been teaching the last 2 Sundays, and I feel bad. I'm almost pushing Paul out because I want to teach so much right now. I've never enjoyed teaching and preaching as much as I have in the last year. It's been amazing.
Okay.
I talked to your dad, who's our associational director, and said, hey, I want to get on the list of supply preaching or maybe even being an interim pastor in Brevard County. And I had not done that, much preaching in the area, or I definitely had not done any interim pastor because I was gone so much.
Yeah, sure.
Anyway.
What do you think sparked that new passion? It's not new, but refreshed the passion.
I think my wife's death, God used that in a special way to redirect and help me prioritize some things that maybe I had just been doing automatically, during the 13 years, and just give me a renewed interest. I have a renewed interest in writing books. I've got 3 in the hopper right now that I'm working on. And so anyway, and I feel that part of continuing your ministry even after death could be in writing.
Sure.
So I'm trying to discipline myself. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, how do you prioritize your time when you're in the season? You seem to be in full control of your calendar.
Well, it's a facade. That's always been the problem about writing. It's just a discipline, and when you're retired, you think you got all the time in the world. But I'm working on now trying to a couple hours every morning to try to write and do some study and all. And I think that's the thing I miss most about the pastorate is the daily study that I was doing to prepare 2 sermons. I tell Scott he's got it easy. He just does one.
You were preparing 2?
We had Sunday morning and Sunday night. And then I taught on Wednesday night as well. I did a book series and all, but so I would spend a lot of time. I would preach through series. And I'd plan out a year in advance the series Sunday morning, Sunday night, the topics and the passage. So on Monday morning, I would start doing the background for Sunday morning. On Tuesday, I would write the sermon. On Wednesday, I do the background for Sunday night. And on Thursday, write the sermon on Sunday night. So I had to be disciplined.
Yeah.
And I miss that because I stopped doing that almost totally.
Yeah.
And but this year with Gail's, while she was sick, the Lord began to speak and reveal things in a new way that I really had so many sermon ideas that I haven't developed yet, but I've got them down to work on. And it's been exciting just to feel a renewed passion. That's where that came from, though.
Yeah, that's awesome. The books that you're kind of working on right now, are they kind of similar concepts to your teaching ministry overseas, or? No,
it kind of goes along with a Bible study method I started January 1 that I never had done before. I've always read through the Bible every year, but I decided I would take one book, the Gospel of Luke, and every morning, in addition to my reading through the Bible, take a paragraph in the English Bible, and then just write sort of an inductive Bible study of what does it say, what does it mean, and what does it say in a practical way, what we do with it. And I wasn't in that more than a couple of weeks. It was in that same time that Gail was diagnosed with a tumor that I said, this could be a book. And so I'm working on the book, The Story of Jesus by Dr. Luke and Dr. Larry.
Okay.
And then I went right into Acts, which is his sequel. And I've gone through Acts doing that same thing, and Romans and First Corinthians this year. Okay. And so there could be a book in Acts for sure, the continuing story of Jesus through the church in Acts. And but the ideas keep coming. It's just discipline of writing.
See them through, yeah.
So,
well, that's exciting.
And this year, I'm doing just one verse a day in the book of Ephesians. I'm focusing, and when I go on the trips, I'm going to try to, if I have any say-so in what I'm going to be teaching in the individual churches, it's going to be from the book of Ephesians.
Okay. That was going to be my next question. So when you go overseas and do these teaching classes, or is it a structured, you kind of are teaching the same thing each time, or has it varied?
Well, when I went with Bruce, we had assigned topics, subjects. And when I go to India, it was with REMA Ministries, which is Ron Herod Evangelistic Ministry Association. And it is, I teach New Testament survey. Okay. So I've taught it over and over again many times. But in Brazil and Romania, I can choose what I want. So, and it usually it's more evangelistic and all, but like I said, I did the discipleship course both at the Romanian Gypsy camp and in the churches in Brazil.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I guess wrapping it up a little bit, what advice would you have for someone who's listening to this and they would like to answer the call to make disciples here and everywhere, but they don't really know how or where to start?
Well, just thinking back on my own story, Amanda, I think you have to start where you are. If it's in a small group and you're discipling and maybe a new believer who has never been discipled. And the tragedy is that's true of most of our churches that I told my Sunday school class Sunday, which is mostly senior adults, most of you probably did not have a specific course when you became a believer, as a new believer, that really sat down and helped you walk through the basics of the Christian life. You learned it as you went to church and Sunday school through the years. But you have, 3 children?
I do.
And you wouldn't, when they're born, you just don't let them loose. And
sure.
I mean, you have to really
It'd be mass chaos.
invest. You have to invest in their life those first few years for sure. They couldn't exist.
Yeah.
But we don't do that for our new believers. And so I would say let's start with the small group that you're in, but also I think as you're faithful in the small things, God begins to make the circle get bigger and bigger. And that's what he's done in my life. He's given me opportunity after opportunity, and I thank him that, it's not anything I did, but if you're faithful in the small things, he, I think he will open the doors for bigger things.
Yeah.
So...
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming on. Thanks for sharing all of the stories. I'm excited to hear about the trips, and I'm excited to see that hopefully the Romania trip will be more full. There's someone out there. I just feel it.
And this last year, Bob Osterholm, who used to be part of our church and then went to Bay West, we were playing golf one day, and I told him I was going. He said, "Hey, can I go?" He had not been in 20 years, but he worked great with the kids. And so he went with me this year, and they loved him, and he added so much to the trip. So We may include some other people when we go to Brazil in late October, early November. We hadn't settled on dates yet, but it would be a 2-week trip, something like that.
So it'd be Romania and then Brazil. I'm assuming your Greece trip. When is the Greece trip going?
May 3rd through 13th.
I'm assuming that one's full.
We've got 3 openings right now because of people dropping out.
Okay, so there's a chance.
Yeah. It's expensive.
Yes.
But it would be a trip of a lifetime.
Okay.
So,
well, if that could be a step for someone too.
We have brochures at the church, or if they contact me, I can get the information to them.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks for joining us.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for letting me share the story.
Of course, of course. Thanks for listening to this episode of Mission Control. If you're interested in learning more about Launch 10X and the different ways to get involved in what God is doing here at First Baptist Melbourne, a great place to start would be visiting our website, launchme.church.